Okay, right.
I think you took me tomorrow.
What that means is, whenever people come out and shoot at the church, so what?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Every time I see a picture of those people, I'm gonna think of I can get that out.
Yeah. Oh, down there.
And I forgot about it.
Dude, but you got a house full of trash.
Sure. One day you're gonna be at the house and you don't know why.
Then.
Sure.
They are. They got too much stuff.
I'm taking pictures. Yeah. They're born to sort of like a little bit. Hopefully I'll be able to see some of our customers. Yeah, I don't know. Some people I know are, kind of funny. I think she's baby number 3. I mean, when you have 2 older siblings, I don't see how you possibly do it. I mean, they're usually outside on their bikes or something. You don't really have a choice. You don't have to.
We would be a little bit.
Everyone's walking around holding their own phone. What's around with her? Is that right? I mean, I think maybe a little nervous you could like trip or something and fall with it. I'm sure they don't let it out of the side, Do what? Are you still so surprised with the girl? No, they don't use the five. That's all I felt for. I didn't say it really out loud. It didn't matter. Some more girls.
We're gonna win 1 game this year.
They might get 2. I mean, you got Mississippi State this weekend.
Maybe.
And then I think you've got
UCF.
Yeah.
Florida State.
App State this weekend. Should. Florida. Not good.
Rod, you doing okay? Does he look better? He's definitely good. Even better before he's sick.
They're working.
Is he gonna continue teaching?
I'm not sure. I hope so.
How are you? Yeah, good. What's going on? Is Jackson 19? Yeah, he's cool. Wednesday. That's the thing, Wednesday, you like. When you walk in, did you started where? Hold on. No, it's actually good. You like it? I'm still, I'll be training for. With the Amy for? Yeah, I haven't even like, I thought to do this and because her office was actually more like, yeah, she's always involved with the kiddo. Today she was there because it was public card. She was facilitating that. We do that. When you're tested, but not absolutely comfortable. Well, I actually have noticed that oh, wow. Just your board. Maybe initially, yes, I get like a stage on it. But yes, and I can't. It's okay if you don't have to remember me at all. I will not be offended. Yeah. Well, it can be up to 140. So it'd be like. Like, yeah, she was having to do something way it's just really good. Yeah. Vibrant. It's been a busy day. We've been pretty much gone from the house all day. It was fun, but now my belly is like, we're gonna pretend to be in labor all day. Oh yeah, that's fun. I have a long ways to go. I have too long of a ways to go. I know they say it gets earlier and earlier every time, but this.
Sorry about that. Elders meeting went a little long. And I can blame Chris, because Chris isn't in here yet. All right. So we'll get started with a word of prayer. And then I believe we're on page 16, going into 17 of our material. I don't know that we've met before.
No.
I'm Ryan.
David is my name.
David, nice to meet you, sir.
As well.
You from around here?
No, from Kentucky.
Okay.
Cincinnati.
Wow, okay. Well, I'm sure glad you're here tonight. I'm Ryan, and we're going to be going through this book on personal evangelism. I can't say much about the author so far, but we're on page 16, going into 17. We're going to wrap up this chapter this evening. Drew, would you mind leading us in a word of prayer? Thank you.
Dear Lord, we are so thankful to come here, Lord, and to study your word, to grow together, Lord. And we pray that this class is edifying to each one of us and encouraging so that we can be better evangelists to those around us, to be lights into the world, to shine and to shine in the darkness and to bring people closer to you. We pray that we can use this as a platform to grow and to teach others and to put away the fear of not being good enough but knowing that you are always good enough, Lord, and that we are just reflecting the perfect light that you shined upon us by giving the example of your Son. We pray that as we study through this and all the other classes throughout this building, that everyone is edified and that we can grow closer to you. And through your Son, we send this prayer. Amen.
Amen. Also, Georgia, I meant to ask you, do you know Sam and Julie Peters?
Yes.
Yeah, Sam preaches up in Iowa. That's where I was last week. I stayed at their house.
Okay.
Yeah, very nice people.
I know they're from
Tupelo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're great.
Yeah, they're very nice people. I got to drink goat's milk.
From them?
Yeah, they have 25 goats.
Okay.
Yeah, they've got 25 goats, and they asked me if I wanted goat's milk. It's good. It was good. It was good. Now I had it refrigerator cold. I'm not sure how funky it gets the warmer it gets, but refrigerator cold, I couldn't tell the difference between goat's milk and regular milk. So
you don't have a discerning palate.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was just the diet of those particular goats. All right, so from our class on Sunday, we were going through this chapter on, what can I be doing in personal evangelism? And I've said it before, and I'll probably say it several more times as we go through this quarter. If we are relying entirely on the preacher to do all the work, if it is Ryan and it's Lee, and that's what we pay Ryan and Lee to do, how come this church isn't growing? If we're relying entirely on a paid preacher to do all the work in a church, is that church ever going to grow? Probably not. Now, I suppose you could say, you might say never is too harsh of a term, because it is God who causes the growth. Remember, Paul told that to the Corinthians. One might plant and another might water, but ultimately it's God who causes growth. And so whether a church grows or doesn't grow, ultimately we do have God's providence involved in that. But just on a practical level, a church needs involvement. We need people. We need our people, us, to be involved in all these things. In fact, that's partly what our elders meeting was about tonight, was just kind of going over how some of the things have gone this year with our evangelistic efforts. And most of it's been really, really good. I mean, we had an Invite a Friend Sunday, and I know I put this on Facebook, 46 visitors that day. And that's 46 visitors. I had, I think, 5 or 6 that I invited, but that's 46 visitors that you guys invited. And that's huge, and that's really, really great. And when we did the Germantown Festival the week that I was gone, I know that Lee wasn't there alone for, I think, more than a couple hours at a time. There were members from the church who went out and went out with him and passed things out and greeted people and talked to people. And so efforts like that aren't successful if it's just Ryan and just Lee doing all the work with that. So that's what this chapter has been about, is what can I do? We ended our class last week on Ephesians 4 and verse 16, from whom the whole body being fitted and held together by that which every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. And I think it's just such a great passage that highlights that each part has a role to play in the building up of the body. Each part of the body is useful. And that doesn't mean you individually have to do everything. And it also doesn't mean that you individually are going to do all the same things that someone else might be doing. All of our body parts are very specialized, after all. The nose is very good at being a nose, but the nose is really, really terrible at being an eye. And so all of our body parts are specialized. I think all of us are specialized as well. I was having a Bible study the other day at the Heritage Retirement Place that's right around the corner here, the senior living place. And we were studying through Acts chapter 1. And we got to the part there where the apostles were casting lots for who would replace Judas. They said, there's 11 of us, there should be 12. God picked 12 apostles, and someone needs to fill his office. And so 2 individuals were brought forward. One of them was Matthias, the other one was Joseph, I believe was his name. And now I'm doubting myself. Why am I doubting myself? Silly me. Joseph, verse 23. There you go. It's because he's got three names. It's one, and they put forward two men, Joseph, called Barsabbas, but who was also called Justice. I was like, it's just like, well, hey, I'm Ryan, but you can call me Bill, but most people call me Steve. Like, okay. So that's why it got me. Anyway, I have a point there. There was a point from Acts chapter 1. In the end, only one of them got to be an apostle. In the end, the lot fell to Matthias. And so you're like, well, does that mean that Joseph just went home being like, well, if I don't get to be an apostle, I'm not going to be anything. I'm not going to do anything in church. Is that the attitude that we're supposed to have? Now, I know that Joseph is a very, very briefly mentioned character in the Bible, and yet there doesn't seem to be any indication that he stomped away as if he lost a popularity contest to Matthias. If you're not going to be an apostle, does that mean you have no purpose in the church? There's nothing left for you to do? That if Joseph's not going to be an apostle, then he might as well just not do anything at all and just go home? Well, no. Everybody has something to do. And if your role is different than mine, then that's just you being you and me being me. And that's okay. And that's good. Let's go to page 17. And let's move on to some practical terms. Before we move on, is there anybody else who just wants to throw anything out there that we haven't covered yet from this chapter? Or any other thoughts or comments along those same lines? Before we move on, let me ask a question. And if you don't have a response to it right now, maybe if it just needs to simmer a little bit more, that's okay. Maybe let's get practical about this. Would you be willing to share a time, or maybe just offer a hypothetical scenario of a situation where someone maybe has to learn a new skill, or is maybe forced into learning a new skill, and they realize, like, well, I've always been a nose, and I always thought all I could be was a nose, but God kind of forced my hand a little bit, and I had to learn to become an eye, and as it turns out, I was a pretty good eye once I learned how to do it. What are some situations where maybe we pigeonhole ourselves too much, and we should expand that a little bit, and maybe open up the possibilities a little bit more of learning a skill? What are some examples of that?
A career path.
Okay, a career path. That's great. You may have done something for 20 years, and it just, I don't know, maybe ran its course, or you had an opportunity to take an early retirement, but you're not old enough yet that you want to be retired. Well, I'm going to try something new, get to a brand new retirement, shifting gears, and you realize, actually, my second career was just as rewarding as the first one because it was different. So that's a great example of it. That's a really good example of it. I've known preachers who've transitioned out of preaching as a vocation and have found that their second career actually gave them more opportunities spiritually than they had when they were preachers. It was almost like being willing to step away from the pulpit in a full-time sense allowed you to give more energy and attention to something over here that's away from the pulpit. All the sermon prep and the very public nature of the work as a preacher does limit a lot of the more personal things that maybe people want to be doing as Christians. And I've personally known preachers who've gotten out of preaching and have found it to be very spiritually rewarding to shift gears in their role in the church. What else? What about things that are specific to the church? You ever been forced to do something that you didn't want to do, but then you were like, okay, I'm kind of glad I had to do that.
Ryan?
Yeah.
It reminded me of my dad after COVID. Ever since he's been almost every week doing a Bible study or more than one with different people. So
yeah,
I kind of forced him to learn how to do Zoom. And ever since then, he's been regular basis Bible study.
Yeah, I think technology is one of those things where we sort of get stuck in our ways, and like I don't want to get a new iPhone. I just like the one I have, or I don't want to. I hate it. This is me talking. I hate it when my iPhone forces me to update. It's like, Ryan, you've been putting this off for 2.5 years now. I really, really need to update. Like, no, I told you before, I'm not interested in any updates. I don't want to change anything. But then you sort of get forced, and I think COVID did that. COVID forced us. Do we all pretty much know how to use Zoom now? Now, maybe we're not all experts in it or something, but Like if someone sent you a Zoom, like, hey, I want to do a Zoom chat with you, would we all pretty much know how to do it at this point? Yeah, sure. Hook up a webcam, get on Zoom, right? Put the little earphones on. I think we all kind of know how to do that now. And maybe before COVID, none of us knew how to do that. It definitely forced, as a church, it forced us to update a lot of things as far as our audio and visual technology. Before COVID, we were not doing any live streaming, like at all. And then once COVID hit, we started doing it, and then it just kind of, we kept doing it because we realized, like, oh yeah, there's a lot of value, actually. The live streaming ends up being a really useful tool for us as a church. So in that sense, maybe only in that sense, I don't want to say COVID was a good thing, but in that sense, it forced us to adopt a medium that has proven to be very useful as a church and useful in evangelism. I don't know. So I just kind of look at it as like maybe you've been a nose your whole life, and that's okay. You know, be a great nose. But sometimes God sort of forces us, often like maybe in smaller congregations. I also personally know.
Does anyone have a Mini Cooper? The lights are on.
I do not have a Mini Cooper. In smaller congregations, people tend to be forced to, when you only have so many people to lead songs, you kind of have to lead songs, or you have to teach Bible classes, or you have to clean the building. So we sort of get forced in a smaller congregation to do those things. Don't take it for granted. We have a great congregation, and pretty much every role is filled at East Shelby. So we're not really forced to do, beyond our own measure very often. But I don't know, be open to it. Okay, so let's go to page 17. What can I do? To help the church grow, we need to stop and consider all the things that we can do. We're not worthless unless we make ourselves that way. And I say that tongue-in-cheek, just, be aware. But we're only as useful as we allow ourselves to be. Like, you may have a ton of skills, but if you're not going to answer the phone, your boss has nothing he can do with you. Like, maybe you're the best neurosurgeon in the world, but if you don't ever answer your pager, I'm making a joke there about doctors and pagers, but if you don't ever answer the phone and you never show up, what is all the training in the world worth if you never actually go use it? So we're only as useful as we allow ourselves to be useful. Everybody has the potential to do something, and that's made very clear, I think, by the story of the talents in Matthew 25. And for the sake of time, we won't go read it. I think we're all very familiar with the parable of the talents. The master allotted to several of his servants a portion of talents that he knew they could handle. I think to the one-talent man, he wasn't making some kind of value assessment of him as a human being. I think he simply saw it as, you have the capacity to handle one talent, and that's fine. And if all you have is one talent, great. That's fine. Have one talent, be very good at it. As an aside, I think sometimes we look at the one-talent man with this, judgment from the very beginning, just a one-talent man. He's just a one-talent man. I got the other way, and this, okay, if you are soldiers in the jungle and you put someone on lookout duty, you have one job to do. Is that a really important job? Now, for the lookout, you go, okay, you be the lookout, and also here's a Rubik's Cube. No, because you are not the one job man because you're worthless, or oh man, there's Bill over there. Just put him on lookout duty because he can't do anything else. Give him one job. No, you give him one job because that is one really important job. And so maybe the master gives the one-talent man one talent because he's like, okay, listen, this is an irreplaceable talent. I only have one of these. This is a very important talent. I need you to handle that one talent with a lot of care. I got to trust you on this one. Take that one talent. I need you to do something with that. So I kind of look at it that way, so that when the one talent man comes back, it sort of gives a little bit more explanation to why the master's so angry at him, as opposed to if he never, well, you're just the one talent. I can only trust you with one talent. he wouldn't have been surprised when the guy came back with just the one talent, because he'd be like, well, that's a one-talent man for you. What was I expecting? No, he's mad at him because he took the one talent and hid it and didn't use it. So if you're a one-talent Christian, maybe God just wants you to be really, really, really focused on that one talent. And that's what you can do in the kingdom. So anyway, that's kind of how I take that story. I feel like that gives it a little bit more explanation. Makes a little bit more sense to me. Yeah, Drew.
The story is also an advocate for growing your talents.
Yeah, true.
Like you were saying, learning new things, not being afraid to take on new challenges.
Yeah.
If you utilize the talents you do have, they'll grow into more talents.
Yeah, exactly. And it's on Sunday I put a little thing up here. It's like you may have one talent, but you can use one talent in a dozen different ways. Like we sometimes limit ourselves to go, I have just one talent. Okay, you have one talent, but you can use that talent in a lot of different ways. And I'll give you like one example, maybe like marksmanship. Okay, maybe your talent is marksmanship. How many different applications are there to good marksmanship? Give me some applications. Where can you use good marksmanship? Military, Secret Service, police, food, hunting, the Olympics. So you can go all the way from being a soldier in Iraq to an Olympic gold medalist to feeding your family with one talent. One talent that has multiple applications. So yeah, you're the one talent man. Okay, there's like 20 ways you can use that talent though. So I think it's a good point that you make, Drew. It's not just about looking at, well, I've got one talent. It's like, okay, that one talent can become a lot of things though, depending on how you apply it. Yeah, go ahead, Megan.
Can we talk about the practical application of this, of how you actually discover how you can use the talents, either the talents that you already have or learning new talents? Because, I mean, everybody in here has something that they can do, but we might think of it as this is just only a secular talent. Like, I don't know, I can dribble 2 basketballs at the same time and switch them around, like juggle them. That's a pretty useless talent. You know, like what, is there a way that we can, practically, how do we discover how our talent can be used for the kingdom?
Because that's very Harlem Globetrotters, right? Very, very limited in your talent.
I also can identify by name almost all of the fonts you use on your PowerPoint. So.
Yay! Okay, see, I always appreciate someone who has an eye for graphic design.
And you just encourage the preacher. Well done.
Yeah, you make me feel good.
It is a little discouraging though, because you are so good at making PowerPoints. It's like, I'm not even needed here. I used to make PowerPoints for preachers and stuff, but now it's like, he already knows where to find stock photos. So, what am I for?
I need to need something. I know who to talk to because I don't know how to use it.
Well, I'll say you could always offer your services to Lee. Don't tell him I said that. Lee's PowerPoints are they're very good PowerPoints. Very good PowerPoints. Okay, well, what do you think? Let's open it up. How do you go through a process of discovering a talent and then how to implement it, like practically? And in the church, let's talk about what we can do for God. Okay, what can we do for God? How do you discover and implement creatively a set of talents? That you might have.
Try something you've never done.
Okay, trying something, and I will say a lot of that is contingent on. I'm not throwing you under the bus, Chris, or anything at all, but a lot of it's contingent on leadership in a church to find opportunities for people to serve. It's like, there are churches that just don't do very much from the top down. I mean, as far as from the top down in terms of leadership, the leadership doesn't have many ideas. The leadership doesn't have very many goals. The leadership just doesn't really have much they want to do. And if your shepherds of a church don't really have any goals for the church, are the members of that church going to have an opportunity to use their talents? Yeah, not really. And so a lot of it comes down to, and again, Chris, you're kind of the representative elder in here, so it's not a knock on you or the elders at all. But a lot of it just comes down to, as an eldership, are our elders saying, okay, you know, we are not just going to be routine. We're not. It's not about just the routine maintenance of church life. It is, what are we going to do that's a new thing? What's a new opportunity? What is a creative way that we can get our members involved in something? And I thought this year has been really good. Like, there have been several really creative things that we've been doing this year that, quite frankly, a lot of churches have not tried before. And I think the Invite a Friend was a way that said, like, okay, everybody has something you can do. Everybody has something. I need volunteers to be greeters. We need people who do follow-up work with that. We need people who will get, hand out cards. And there's a lot of stuff to do with that. I think the Ladies' Day was a great idea, to find talented women in our own congregation who have the knowledge and the ability. And I know that if you asked every one of them, they're too modest, and every one of them would say, well, I don't know if I have the ability. But by all accounts, they all did a really, really good job. And I'll just say, not very many churches are out there saying, hey, are there women in this congregation who want to do public speaking and teaching? We have an opportunity for that, and we want to encourage that, and we want to see our women stepping up and really taking charge of something like that. And so, yeah, Chris, go ahead.
I remember I was baptized in West Memphis, and it was a small congregation. I believe I was 13. But to a young Christian, regardless of age, getting up in front of people is just absolutely terrifying to a lot of us. Mm-hmm. And that's a skill that's somewhat learned and developed over the years. And I remember when I was trying to give Preston some comfort, I remember waiting on the table for the first time, and I prayed that the bread would nourish our bodies. I was scared to death. And so the thing is, when you're at the end of the day, at some point, whether you're teaching a class or whether you're public speaking or whatever you're doing, don't give up on yourself to think that I can't try to be something that I've never been.
Yeah.
At some point, when we go home at night and you've got a quiet moment to say, can I push myself to try one thing and see if I can repeat it, or talk to somebody who might be better at it and say, well, how do you do it? How do you get up in front of people? How do you maybe just read a scripture, or maybe wait on the table without a prayer?
Yeah.
And, start in steps and making yourself go a little bit further every time. And whether that's teaching a class or teaching a grade school and then maybe moving up to a junior high or whatever that talent is, to a guy, I'll speak for myself, getting up in front and thinking about doing an invitation is terrifying.
Yeah.
And, trying to be to preach, to you it's nothing, because you do it all the time.
Well, it's my job.
What I'm saying, but when you first start,
no, but I'm saying, it's like that's why I get it is when you do something all the time, it is easy to do. The more you do it,
it's easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just say to each individual, can we challenge ourselves to maybe try to be a different limb? At least say, well, look, I tried it. I'm really not good at it. It's not my comfort zone, and maybe that's not the right limb for me. But I'll try another one.
And I know people who've tried teaching, and they tried it, and they came out of it saying, I basically wanted to throw up every single Sunday that I was going into it. I won't say who it was. It was someone in this room. Let me offer an illustration. And then Rebecca, you did have a thought before, but I'm going to draw some. I don't want to be a distraction, but I have a point I want to make. You go ahead and offer your thought.
So I was just going to say that we're not really aware of what we can do as a body unless we know our body and what our body parts can do.
Yeah.
Like, I know that my feet can run and they can jump and they can kick things. I know my body. So as a congregation, if we know our body and know the talents of those people, when we see something, for instance, if Megan says, hey, I would love to find a way, I don't know about dribbling basketball, quite frankly, but as far as like graphic design and stuff goes, we're doing the VBS in-house, and the thing that they struggled with most for the VBS was all of the visuals. So, like, know that that's something that you are interested in, I can say, hey, I hear you do this. And I think that's how you end up finding places where you can.
And that comes down to just knowing each other. When we know each other, and a church, members that don't know each other don't know those opportunities are there. If I have a talent or a skill and I don't know how to employ it, maybe it's just because the strong relationships aren't there. Where I didn't realize, I didn't even know that Whitney did most of the work behind the scenes. Putting together the VBS this year. If I had known that, then I would have known that she needed this and needed this and needed this, and so it's just about knowing each other. So good relationships will help with a lot of that. And then let me make this point, and then Joe, you had a thought also. I think one other way that you can help to discover and cultivate good, talent in a church is to focus on the dozens and dozens of other ways that we serve each other and God that aren't public and obvious. It is easy for us to focus, especially as men, it is very easy for us to focus on try song leading, try preaching, do a Wednesday night invitation. That is about, and I'm just for argument's sake, I'm just throwing a random number out. So I'm not saying literally this, but just for argument's sake, that's like 1% of what a church is supposed to be doing. Song leading, preaching, doing a Wednesday night invitation. That's like 1% of what we're supposed to be as a church. There's all this other stuff, though, that's the behind-the-scenes stuff. And maybe we would do a better job of discovering and utilizing talent if we realized I don't have to be a preacher or a song leader in order to use my talents for God. But when I realize that there are meals that need to be made, that there's counseling that needs to be done, that there are teenagers that desperately want role models and mentors to talk to them about the struggles they're going through, when there are elderly people who are just aching for company, for someone to come sit with them and talk to them a little while, when there are Bible classes that could be had if only someone had just asked, hey, would you ever want to go get coffee and just talk about the Bible? There is like 99% of what we should be doing as a church is all stuff that's behind the scenes. The analogy, of course, being the iceberg, right? We've all seen the analogy of the iceberg, that most of the mass of an iceberg is underwater, and you never see it. And that's what it should be in a church. So I think is probably one of the best things we can do, is just to open up our eyes a little bit more about what does it mean to have talents and to use them well. There's like all these different things I could be doing as a Christian, and maybe it's not deacon's work or whatever, but that's the stuff that really serves the purposes of God. I mean, after all, what is religion according to James chapter 1? What does James 1 say? What is religion? Yeah, to visit widows and orphans in their distress, to keep oneself unstained from the world. That is religion, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that evangelism isn't also religion, or that worship isn't also religion, but I think James is trying to prove a point there. Joe, you have a thought?
Yeah, I think it's already been fleshed out to a point, but just to Megan's question as far as the practical way to approach it is, the more we fellowship with one another, you touched on relationships, but the more we fellowship, true fellowship with each other, we know what each other's strengths and weaknesses are, and they can complement better, and therefore the body gets stronger when the individual members are working together, complementing one another.
Yeah, that is a great point. And that's something I tried to teach Preston when he was here for the 2 years that he was working with me. And I tried to really impress upon Preston, like in a given week, the work that a preacher puts into just getting sermons ready or reading books. Like, that can't just be all I do for God. That there's all these other things, and there's visiting that I can be doing, and encouraging and following up and studying with people and being a mentor and being a role model to our teenagers and younger couples, new parents. Because after all, I'm one of the middle-aged parents at this point, right? I kind of am. It really dawns on me sometimes when I look in the mirror. I was asked by a couple other preachers to do a video interview this week, a pre-recorded interview that's going to air as part of an online forum in October. and they wanted to interview me on mentoring and, not just preacher mentoring, but just being a mentor to young men and, what kind of is involved in mentoring young men. And it's like, wait a minute. You want to interview me about mentoring young men? I see what you did there. Okay. All right. So with our last part of our class, there are three things in the material that we can cover, and if we don't finish, we don't finish. If we move on to other things, that's fine as well. And Chris, you and I, let's talk this week about how we want to divide up the rest of the material. We still haven't had a chance because I've been gone, and then he was gone the week before. We haven't really divided up who's going to teach what this quarter, but we need to talk about which classes we want to do. And which weekends maybe you and I will be gone. But maybe be prepared to do the next chapter. So, when we break, just be prepared on Sunday to get into that chapter on the excuses that we make. But for now, let me offer you three things that I can do as far as personal evangelism goes. If I'm not comfortable teaching, which is fine. If I have terrible stage fright and I can't preach, that's fine also. What can I do to help save the lost? Well, the first thing is I can love the lost. And I think we don't really think about it like that. Is something I can do, is I can show that I love people, even lost people. I can be nice to people, I can be kind and friendly, and I can be hospitable, and I can be welcoming to people, and I can act without suspicion toward people. I can love lost people, even people who do not like me very much. It's very clear to most people whether or not a church is a loving one. If we do not have a genuine concern for a soul's welfare, then he or she will see right through us, and they will reject the gospel. Are we just putting in our time when we evangelize the lost? Are we just trying to get the preacher off of our backs? If we truly love lost people, then why do so few of us do anything about it? I ask that rhetorically. Of course, it's not accusatory, but just rhetorically. Truly loving somebody involves telling them what they need to hear, regardless of a response. We also need to remember that it involves preaching the gospel to people that we might not like very much. I think that's a really important point to bring out. Loving the lost means even loving the people who are different from us, or who may be antagonistic toward us, or maybe people, be careful here, maybe people that on some subtle back of my mind level that I'm kind of prejudiced against. Do we ever have a sense? We're in Collierville, Tennessee. It's a beautiful, clean suburb of Memphis. We don't hear gunshots out here in Collierville. It's a nice community. Nice quiet street out here, pretty old neighborhood over here, trees and everything. And it's like, there's a certain person, they're our people. And someone might walk in the building and go, well, you don't really look like kind of our type of people here at East Shelby. Okay, on some subtle level, do we show a prejudice toward certain people? Of course, James chapter 2 takes that and punches it in the face when showing favoritism toward people. But loving the lost means loving even lost people who you might not naturally love because of prejudice, however subtle that prejudice might be. A couple of bullet points here. Don't forget that Christianity is for everybody, regardless of a person's sinful background. People don't have to pass your background check in order to become a Christian. People don't have to be people that you like in order to become a Christian. People don't have to look like you or share the same background as you. Christianity is for everybody. You and I are not the gatekeepers of who gets to be in the church and who we don't want to have in the church. That is not for us to make that decision. It's not up to you to decide how a person is going to respond after being converted. We sometimes dismiss somebody because of their past misdeeds without realizing that it is the worst of sinners who often come to God with the deepest humility, and we should give everybody a chance. Sometimes someone might get converted, right? They get baptized, and we go, yeah, he ain't going to be here next Sunday. Like, glad we baptized him, but he's not going to stick. He's not going to stick. She's not coming back. Like, I don't know. I'm only saying things. I'm only saying things that that have crossed my mind. Okay, and if none of this applies to you, I guess that shows what a monster I am. But I have a sinking feeling. I have a sinking feeling that I am not speaking just for myself here. Just because you don't like somebody does not mean that God does not love him or her. Remember in Romans chapter 5, how much did God love us? It says in Romans chapter 5, while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son. Okay? While we were still sinners, Jesus came and did that for all of us. Try to keep in mind that even the worst sinners of the world were once innocent little children. That's what we sometimes think about. Like, we look at someone and, scraggly, rough life, scars on their face, clearly someone who's kind of down on their luck, maybe an alcoholic, maybe has the scars of drug use on them. And we look at them for all that they are right now. And we forget that at one point, that was a baby that was born innocent and pure. And that what Jesus is offering is for that person to have that innocence restored to them. And to judge that person for what they are at face value right now is to deny them what Jesus is offering them. This is the restoration of their God-defined humanity. And I think that's just not something that we're allowed to do. It's just beyond what we should be doing. And when faced with unlikable people, also bear in mind that you may have been a pretty unfriendly and obnoxious person before you were a Christian. Yet somebody showed you some love, right? Maybe you were not like a finished product, okay? But someone loved you enough to teach you the gospel. So, maybe we need to be given the same grace to others that someone thought to extend to us. All right, that was tough. I know. I'm only saying stuff that I need to hear myself. I'm being tough on myself. If that's tough on you too, then I'm just, I think, doing the job that I'm meant to do. So, any thoughts there on that point? I know that was hard stuff, but you guys have any thoughts along those lines?
It goes to the heart of hating sin, but loving the sinner and being able to separate the two to fulfill that action.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hate the sin, right? And God hates the sin. Romans chapter 8 and verse 3 talks about how God sent his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and as an offering for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh, right? God condemns sin. He defeats it unequivocally in Jesus, in the flesh of Jesus on the cross. God hates sin and what it does to us and the way that it corrupts his creation. And so we need to hate sin as well. What we're offering to people then is, again, a restoration of the innocence that they once had and a rebirth that can only happen in Jesus. So that's a good point, Joe. Good point. Anything else along those lines? Anything else before we move on? So, second thing that we can all be doing to help the lost is to be patient with people. People are not going to be converted right away. They're not going to be changed by one or two sit-down Bible studies. A sermon here and there, or like an invitation to lunch on Sunday. Now, we need to be doing all of those things, but let's not expect let's not treat the gospel like we're selling like miracle cream or something like that. Okay? Like, hey, listen, I promise, just a 2-week trial. That's a 2-week trial for your money back. Like, that's not what we're selling here. It's like, listen, I've got this little flip chart here, and I'm going to go through this little flip chart in a Bible study, and at the end of it, it's going to say, so, you want to be baptized? Like, that's not what we're offering. That's not what we're doing here. And maybe you use a flip chart, but maybe the flip chart doesn't work, and you got to go back to the drawing board and think of more creative and patient ways to help teach people. So, we could keep talking about this sort of stuff. Last point I'll make, and then I'll let you go. Susan.
Well, I just want to say that the hardest, I think the most valuable gift that we have, that we can give someone, is the one that's hardest for us to give up because we can never get it back, and that's our time. Mm-hmm. We're not willing to put in the time that it takes.
Yeah, time. Just An hour. An hour feels like a lot, though. Like if you're sitting there with a stranger with an open Bible, like what am I going to say for an hour? I don't want to be too mystical about it, so forgive me if this sounds a little weird, but I do take it seriously when Jesus told his disciples in Matthew 10 that, in that hour, don't worry about what you're going to say. And again, I'm not mystical here, like the Holy Spirit tells me what to say. I have found, though, that when I'm not sure what I'm going to say to people in a Bible study, that if I just sit down and start talking to them and I just give them my attention and we open up our Bibles together, somehow or another, I won't call it inspiration because I'm not sure I can support that exact notion, but somehow or another, the truth just seems to get conveyed in that conversation and the right thing gets said. So, give your time to people and you never know how the conversation will go. Great point. Thank you, Susan. All right. So be prepared for page 19 when we get together on Sunday. Yeah, we can talk. I'm not planning on being out of town. Yeah. Yeah. All right. No, that's okay. Listen, I know the material pretty well.
I think you do.
Yeah.
I talked about it a little bit yesterday.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
My ears were burning all the way from
They should be.